Welcome to It's an Inside Job, the podcast where we equip you with actionable skills to build resilience, enhance communication, foster well-being, and lead and coach with impact. I'm your host, Jason Lim, and every Monday we bring you expert insights and real-world stories to help you thrive and succeed. And with that said, let's slip into the stream. Well, welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining me for another long-form discussion on this Monday. Today, you're going to learn 3 major benefits from listening to this episode. First, you're going to learn some practical strategies for managing stress and pressure, especially if you're transitioning from an individual role to a leadership position. Second, we are going to explore how to maintain balance between your work and your personal life. Now, what we're going to do is discover some actionable tips that can help you through these challenges more effectively. And lastly, you're going to discover how to foster psychological safety and accountability within your team, enabling them to be better at communication and creating strong workplace relationships, that cohesion that is so necessary for high-pressure teams, high-performing teams. Today, I'm privileged to be joined by Jonathan Bennett. Now, he left an executive role at a large hospital to strike out on his own, founding a management consulting firm. And after 10 years, things were going great. The company grew, became a B Corp, and served hundreds of organizations. The problem, that he didn't feel fulfilled. After a successful exit in which he went through a management buyout of his company, Jonathan founded his coaching practice so he could fulfill his purpose to create an intimate space for leaders who need to be listened to deeply. Now, Jonathan is an advisor and executive coach for founders, CEOs, and C-suite leaders who have a purpose in the world but need help solving their organization's toughest obstacles. So today's conversation with Jonathan is very insightful, and we pick apart a lot of actionable skills. The first part of the episode will be talking about leading yourself, managing yourself. And then after that, we're going to move into managing others, how to create psychological safety and accountability. So without further ado, let's slip into the stream and meet Jonathan Bennett. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone back to the show. Today, I have Jonathan Bennett with me. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jason. It's so great to be here.
I was wondering, could we kick off by you just briefly introducing who you are and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So these days, I do a bunch of different things. I'm an executive coach and trusted advisor to leaders and founders all across North America and beyond. I'm also an independent board director, so we sit on 3 corporate boards and 1 nonprofit board.
You're a very busy man then. And I see you have a dog behind you somewhere too. Dog owner.
Yes, there is a dog that will roam a little bit. Hopefully she'll be very quiet during the whole thing.
That's great. Well, the reason I wanted you to have on your show, because you're highly recommended from a very close friend of ours. And what I'd like to do is maybe have a 2-part discussion. The first is to understand how we can lead ourselves from your experience and what is some of your sort of go-to skills and knowledge or what have you. And then to evolve the conversation towards leading others and in the sense of psychological safety and accountability. So perhaps we could maybe kick off. Obviously, you've worked with a number of scores and scores of executives and working professionals. And obviously, stress and pressure are inherent with a lot of the positions or the people that you work with, I presume. Maybe we could, from your experience, how do you find that people handle pressure and stress before they actually employ you, hire you for your services?
Yeah, it's a great question and a really great place to start. I think that it's lovely when people come to me proactively, like before things are kind of quote unquote bad. I like it when folks show up and say, I'm taking a new job, or I can see a T intersection in my life or my career or my business that's coming up. And I'd like to do some thinking and some planning work in advance of this moment sort of happening. I'd like to be intentional about it. It does happen, but it happens less than the phone rings metaphorically or literally with somebody saying the wheels have fallen off. I don't know what's going on. I'm in a bit of a panic. It's urgent, etc. And that's no problem, of course. But the work is a bit different. And the work sort of, in that case, begins in a sort of triage kind of way. I usually spend quite a lot of time just kind of catching the initial complexity of the circumstances and the context, and that involves what I like to call a lot of plot and characters. I've got to get up to speed on the narrative of what's brought us to today, and what the underlying conditions are. And then it's only then that we can start to group some things and find some themes and figure out where it is that we might want to go. So it's a lovely thing that happens, and I gotta say it happens more often with younger folks that are earlier in their career, when they're building and they have a kind of, I mean, I don't know if it's just culturally they've been in therapy more, or they've it's just sort of like they're just a bit more self-aware around the need for support as they go in this journey of leadership, that they'll hire somebody like me to walk alongside them as they approach these more difficult moments in their journey. And I do really like it. It's a really different kind of work.
Yeah. Do you find, I guess you're speaking to millennials and Generation Z?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, do you find, irregardless of sort of age or generation, that there are certain common denominators that most of your clients face when it comes to stress and pressure? And I'm not talking about stress as in duress, but duress, more the negative stress that can be it can weigh us down. Do you find that there are certain commonalities that working professionals have?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the most common thing that I see is people find themselves in leadership positions because they've been excellent at doing something. So they've come up through the ranks at being some kind of doer, and they're really, really good at it. And it doesn't matter if you're in healthcare or architecture or on the front lines of anything. You get really, really good at something through repetition, through study, through all of the things. And then you get so good at it that your colleagues and teammates look to you for advice and support. You're still doing it, but you're sort of naturally supporting other people around you on the team. And then a job comes up, and it's a management job. And folks look around and they think, well, this person here, I mean, they're the one that seems to naturally have the leadership skills and abilities, and so we promote them. And then we typically abandon them. And it's somehow should be self-evident how one is supposed to lead and what is supposed to do with one's time. But in fact, the job is completely different. It's a totally different job, and that is the first sort of complex nexus point for leaders, is that they find themselves promoted and then a bit alone. And what are they facing? Well, they're facing now they're in charge of either their friends or their former colleagues. Their job is not what it used to be, and so the certainty and the lure of getting back down into the weeds and just doing the work yourself like you used to, because that's what you're good at. I mean, that's the dopamine hit for a lot of new managers, is to just go back and remind themselves that they genuinely do know what they're doing. And they do that by doing their old job, which of course is not their new job. And it's very confusing for everybody around them. And so I spend a lot of time with folks helping them with what those new items are, which is managing yourself, managing others, delegating, performance management, time management. These are the basics of being, a leader of people in a management role. But rarely are we actually sort of taught how to do it and how to do it in our own context. And so that's sort of the first, common, moment. The next I'd say that happens is further down the track. And this is when organizations are going through some kind of complex change.
Mm-hmm.
It could be scaling, it could be doing a turnaround. Maybe it's a merger, an acquisition. Maybe maybe they're unfortunately going out of business. Who knows?
Yeah.
But something that's big and difficult, and that's really when leaders are, they've got a kind of existential or ethical series of problems that they need to work on. And I spend a lot of time with folks. And, frankly, that's the most interesting and difficult kind of work I get to do is when folks sit with me through that. Everyone is a little bit different, but there are some common themes. But they're the two sort of main kind of points, I'd say.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just stop there for a minute.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, it sounds like in both cases, and they are general common denominators. Of course, they're refined and they're bespoke to a person's situation.
Mhm.
But do you find that self-awareness is key to self-leadership? I mean, let's take the first one you talked about, where a person gets promoted because of their skill or knowledge. And all of a sudden, they need to learn leadership skills or communication skills at a whole different level. And a lot of people characterize communication skills as soft skills, but I think sometimes they are the hardest skills to learn because you need a level of psychosocial emotional intelligence. So when you're working with this particular conundrum with someone, um, what do you specifically recommend, or what do you specifically help them with to build that psychosocial emotional intelligence to lead other people through change, through complexity, through challenge?
Yeah, love it that you went there. Most of my work is trying to create some level of metacognition
Mm,
in a leader, is allowing them to both be in the moment and viewing the moment, and allowing them to understand that there's more than going on than just whatever their needs are, that they're with other humans.
mm,
And so they need to understand a bit about how they're showing up.
mm,
So that can be mindfulness, that can be other tools, but allowing them to sort of grow aware of how they're being perceived by others, how they're managing and dealing and coping, and what the kinds of triggers are that they may have in and around the team. We can spend a lot of time with one another, trying to just sort of isolate those things that happen, and then allowing them to build some tools around being more skilled.
mm.
It's funny, Jason. One of the things that I find myself doing more than anything else is scripting for people. So no one likes role playing. Like I've never found anybody that said, maybe other than some actors that say, "Oh, sign me up for role playing." That sounds awful. But actually, I naturally fall into it. I'll be having a conversation with a client, and they'll be saying, "I'm really struggling with my VP. He's kind of a dick to me, and or he does this or he does that." And I'll be like, "Okay, so I'll be him. Like,
Mm,
what do you do? Like, let's
mm,
replay that conversation that went badly. Let's
mm,
just redo it." And I can kind of pause,
mm,
with my imaginary remote control, and I'll be like, "What's going on for you?" As I just said that, or I pushed back.
mm.
Well, like I'm finding that I'm really resistant, or I'm like, "What's happening in your body?
Yeah.
Are you getting sweaty armpits? Are you kind of like you feel yourself getting flushed?"
Mm,
And they might be like, "Yes," or I find myself shutting down. So we start to figure out what happens to each person when they're in these circumstances.
mm,
And then once we've isolated what the thing is that's going on for them, we can start to get a bit predictive in our work. So I know that, every Tuesday morning, I've got to see this VP in this meeting. I know he's going to come at me ahead of time. Probably when he does, I'm going to do one of two things. And when I do that, here's where my go-to is. And so
mm,
we can start to game it out a little bit. And that just gives them some self-confidence that that they don't need to just power down or react emotionally or
mm,
whatever the case may be. We just give them a few more tools. And once they get some successes that have built up, then maybe we can think of some other things like, what would a conversation look like in this example with that VP outside of that meeting? What about swinging
mm,
by their office and just opening up a conversation about how you find working with them?
mm,
People are like, "Oh my God, could never do that." I'm like, maybe not, but maybe they're different when they're outside of a meeting. Like maybe you just need to get
mm.
to know them on a human level. Maybe you need to get curious about their family and their kids. Maybe you just, like there's maybe a different way. So, a lot of my work is just trying to open up people to possibilities, build curiosity. It's all relational kind of work.
Yeah, at the end of the day, leadership is about building relationships and maintaining those relationships. And I really like what you said, where there's a delineation between performance when they actually have to have that conversation with the VP, for example, but the practice. It's almost we can almost use a sports analogy. When you're actually
Yeah.
performing on the field and when you're practicing off the field. But the practicing sounds like to me that you're helping them to manage moments, to understand the thinking of the narrative that's going through their head, to understand that maybe the embodied cognition of if they feel flustered or flush, or if they're feeling stuck or resistant, right? To understand their emotions and to address that, because I think what you're saying is very salient, because if we are cognizant to thoughts running through our head, the emotions that are being communicated from our physiology to our psychology, then we can also manage how we want to behaviorally, or in the doing, do we want to engage or disengage? Do we want to have a deeper conversation, increase the dynamics, so we're not constantly falling into this pattern, this dance that we have, because we're so used to communicating this way, right? The VP and the whatever, the president and such.
Totally.
I really, really like that idea. It's to make them cognizant, because if you can create a cognitive map, that gives them, as you said, a sense of confidence, a sense of certainty that they don't have to go back to their reactive patterns, that they have a pattern that they've rehearsed with you, per se, obviously multiple times. And I guess you take in multiple things to multiple approaches, not things, approaches to help them kind of paint a more vibrant picture. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's beautiful the way you've put it. A lot more kind of clinical than I obviously would, and I really am drawn to that. I am looking often to disrupt patterns, to interrupt patterns of behavior, and sometimes it's easy for me to see because I'm not in it. Other times, I can understand what's happening in the mind of the other person, especially if it's a boss. I find that I support middle and upper middle managers to understand the way CEOs are thinking and the way founders are thinking, because I've been there and I understand what the pressures are. And they don't have much of a window into what those pressures may or could be. So sometimes I can create empathy by just helping them imagine what it could be like for them and what's on their plate. I'm not taking their side, but I'm just trying to create a bridge of understanding there. And I do find myself doing that quite a bit as well. And I find that can help take the pressure off and break the cycle or pattern of behavior that's been happening between the two people.
That's interesting. If we could just shift the conversation, because I think this is also another relevant point. You were talking, in our pre-interview about sort of work-life balance. Many of the professionals I work with, and it may also be indicative of the clients you have, they are right in the middle of their career. They're doing well. They're managing people, per se. Maybe they're leading or what have you. But they have small kids and they have aging parents, and so there's this complexity around this age, and where they want to put in more time at work, but they also have to find some sort of harmony or balance with, well, their private demands. I mean, what are some of your suggestions or recommendations about striking a balance, and what would you define as work-life balance? Maybe we can begin there.
It is hard to define. I think it's different for everybody, and it's probably a dynamic definition over the course of your career. Uh, it I think we look to work for different things at different points along the way. I'll tell you a little story. When I was a fairly new father, I was, and this is going back, let's say, well, it would be 15, 17 years or so. I remember we were, for some reason I can't remember, we were staying over at the in-laws' place for an extended period of time. Maybe it was a month or something. And I remember nipping out early in the morning to go to work, like really early, like at 7 a.m. or something. and I was just leaving, and my father-in-law came trudging down the hallway and looked up at me, and I was sort of like sneaking out, at 7 in the morning. And he says, "Ah, yes, the guilty pleasure of work." And I remember that really, really well, because it was an escape for me. It was, in a way, a more structured, knowable place to be than what it's like to live with young kids. And my eldest kid's autistic. And so it was, it had its own flavor of complexity. Every family is different, of course, but that was mine. And I mean, he sort of stopped me in my tracks, I think, because he called me on something, which was I was running away from something. And it's a plausible thing to run away to, isn't it? Work, I mean, it's always demanding. At the time, I was an executive at a hospital. And so
Yes.
it had this veneer of urgency and human importance to it. But really, I was running out the door because looking after two really young kids was harder and emotionally exhausting. And my wife and I were just struggling with the volume of what it's like to look after young kids, which is, pretty normal. So I think that that's true. For that period of time when you've got those sorts of obligations, but life and ages and stages, right? Things move on, and sometimes we hit burnout. Other times we're super engaged and almost unstoppable in our creativity around work. And it'd be easier to say don't work until 11 o'clock at night, unless, of course, it's life-giving and amazing. And at various times in my life, working late into the evening has both been absolutely awful and absolutely amazing. So I think for me, it's been, and I think how I like to show up for my clients is just trying to understand the broader context
Yes.
of how somebody is and where they're at in their journey. And is this thinly disguised workaholism, or is it a distraction, or is it genuinely a creative and wonderful moment in a cycle? So I'm looking for those things.
Yeah, obviously it's as you said, it's different from one person to another. When I think about the complexity of my life, I sometimes think about the word for me balance has a lot of sort of different connotations, and balance in a
Mm,
very tumultuous, demanding, complex life, I think is I think it can be it's like balancing glasses on a walking on a stormy ship. It's very difficult to do that. For me, sometimes I find that literally the words that I choose can actually help me frame a
mm,
very crazy or busy life in a different way. So words like harmony for me might be something where in my head, Jonathan, I have to make peace with that. Sometimes I have to make trade-offs. If I need to see my boy perform at something, then I will make that conscious, cognizant choice to say, you know what, emails and what have to wait. I'm there 3 hours to see him perform at whatever it is, and I want to be
mhm,
present. And then other
mm,
times I might ask my
mm,
wife. My wife's also a working professional, and I'll say, "Hey, Katrina, I've got to work late on Thursday, and then probably Friday night. Is it okay if you take care of the kids?" And so there's this
yeah.
sort of negotiation compromise where we help each other. And so at that point, I have to be cognizant that, okay, just for these couple of days, my family's just got to take a back seat right now, unless there's some sort of emergency, but not disregarding any outliers. Then if I can do that, then I'm at peace with myself. I've also
Yeah, yeah.
clarified my expectations to those closest to me, what's going on. So they have a cognitive map of what's going on. And
Yeah.
it's not always ideal, but for me, that's always been one way that has helped me in most situations, Jonathan.
I like that a lot. And I think whenever we can help the people around us, whether they're people at work or people at home,
Mhm.
with not just the what, like I have to work,
Mm,
late for the next 3 days to deadline, but help them understand why it's
mm,
important to you. And I think that comes up in my practice a lot. Like
mm,
somebody will be frustrated and they'll tell me, I've told them over and over again, like, here's the thing. And I'm like, yeah, but maybe they don't understand why it's important to you, like why it really matters.
mm,
And
mm,
with that little bit of extra information, they can bridge the gap. They can give you the grace that you are
mm,
asking for. And it's a bit like being told what's happening as opposed to being told why it's happening. And somehow you're
mm,
being enrolled in
mm.
the change or the situation or whatever it is. So I like that. I like that a lot. And I'm sure that would resonate with a lot of folks out there,
Mm,
this sort of dance that we do with our spouses and our partners
mm,
and also, our work, the people around us at work,
mm,
there's also the times when, to your point, like we have to be extra there for our kids or our spouse or our aging parents. And um, work has only recently become an
mm.
okay place where we can even communicate that we have a home life, let alone one that's emotionally difficult.
Yeah, crazy as
and
that sounds, yeah,
no, it
yeah.
really does, but it's still relatively new. And you and I mean, I imagine we're around the same age. When we started work, it was like you didn't have a home life at work. You never talked about it, not in any meaningful way. And you certainly didn't discuss or let anybody around you know that, there were difficult things going on or that you were bringing a bit of hardship from
Mm,
home into your workspace and that you
mm,
needed a bit of grace because of that.
mm,
Whereas, that's now a pretty strong reality. And in fact, I deal with the other side of that, which is, I've got Gen X bosses that are CEOs that are like, where's the line, Jonathan? Like I'm not their therapist, and I'm giving them so much space that I
mm,
feel like I can't performance manage them now because I'll be letting them down.
mm.
Like, how do I, how do we? Where are the boundaries around these things between work and life? And I think these are really interesting things too because they go to the balance and the harmony part.
Mm.
It's like, well, we want our work life to be so rich that I'm living my values at work, and yet I don't want to work too hard, so I burn out, and I need to have enough time at home, and yet we're like, yeah, I mean, boundaries for me are an interesting and fairly porous
Mm.
uh, topic that come up a lot in my practice.
Yeah, again, back to I think a lot of it is self-awareness and, what you
Mm,
do to ask them to be more cognizant of, sort of the underlying thinking and emotions behind why they react the way they do react. But I think a very important aspect of this work-life balance, lack of a better term for now, I think it's also a level of self-compassion. For me, a lot of us turn compassion on for everybody else. When it comes to us, we kind of turn it off. I mean, we just use such derogatory and sometimes demeaning language towards ourselves. And sometimes we don't even realize it. We'll say to ourselves, oh, I'm such an idiot. Or, God, that was so stupid. Or everyone's going to think I'm incompetent or whatever. We have this mind talk,
uh-huh.
this self talk, right? And I think
Yeah.
for me, one thing I've learned long ago, I'm not perfect at it, and what I try to help clients with is self-compassion. Is that's like, what are you learning from the situation? You can feel shit for a day. Fine. That's more than allowed. But at some point, you have to pick yourself up, or you will want to pick yourself up and ask yourself, what did I learn from this? What are the insights so I can, it's almost like an after action report, after the
Yeah. Yeah.
situation, take it apart,
Uh-huh.
understand the DNA, take the lessons learned and improve yourself or strengthen yourself, or if you've done something really well, continue doing it, right? And I think by
Mm,
doing this, by being at peace with yourself, with the private and professional spheres, and understanding that
mm,
trade-offs are okay, and to be peace with that. But I think a lot of that takes self-compassion, because I think a lot of us can lace ourselves with guilt and shame and a bad conscience because we're constantly saying, I should, I have to, I must kind of thing. At least that's my take on it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I think that'll resonate with everyone. I mean, these stories, they were often deep. You know, I have a personally, I have quite a hard boundary. I don't do life coaching and I don't freelance as a therapist or anything like that.
Mm,
My wife is a therapist. I have way too much respect for the clinical skills
mm,
that she and folks that do that work do. But I tend to gather these things up at the boundary, and I label them, and I hand them back to my clients and say, you know, you should go think about this, or you should get a therapist and you should go work on this because, you
mm,
know, I'm hearing a lot of negative self-talk. And
mm,
I imagine a therapist may ask a question, something like, where did that first begin? And that's work that I don't
mm,
want to do with you, and I'm really not qualified to do with you,
mm,
but I do encourage you to go do it. I've done it
mm,
personally, and the knock-on effect of doing that hard, deep work is profound,
mm,
and it is about you know, self-compassion and understanding how your mind works, and you know what's at the root of
mm,
where these stories first started and why they, you know, they probably worked. They probably kept you safe as a
mm,
kid and or as a young person, and they tend to not serve you very well when you're in, you know, the C-suite or you're in upper
mm,
management,
mm.
and you're beating yourself up to some ridiculous degree about something. And you know, and it comes, I think it comes into my practice with labels like, you know, perfectionism,
Mm,
or you know, like, imposter syndrome. These
mm,
are sort of like labels that are, you know, Instagram worthy now, and I think that they're real. But I think this is work that is been around a long time,
mm.
and I think that it's super relevant in the kind of development, personal and self-development
For
work that we
sure.
need to do as
Mm,
leaders, because it can't just be what we're doing, you know, in our all hands meeting on a Tuesday morning. You know, if you're going to show up and be successful in that as the chair of the meeting and the leader of the team,
mm,
if you've done enough deep self-work, you're not going to get triggered when somebody pushes back or
mm,
somebody does blame somebody else. You're going to be like,
mm.
able to stay really regulated and know how to respond and how to adapt in a dynamic situation like that.
In the first part, Jonathan Bennett and I explore the critical insights leaders need in navigating both their home turf and their work turf. We first explored the pressures when technical leaders, when they're really good at something, they get promoted to a leadership level, and how that requires a whole different set of mindset and skills. But sometimes we're not equipped with that, or the corporation or the organization we work for just expects that we'll just slip into the role and do a great job. But there are the inherited natural pressures and stressors that come with that type of promotion. And in those kind of ecosystems, Jonathan emphasizes the critical importance of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and leadership skills in managing stress and pressure effectively. We then delved into the second challenge, which is the complexities of balancing work and our personal lives. You know, he shared his own personal experience with juggling professional demands and family responsibilities. You know, striking that balance, finding that harmony, finding that compromise to that work-life balance that we all need to find, it is an ongoing iterative process. There is not one solution, one panacea, a panacea for that. We need to find our own way. We need to come to terms with what we need to be able to focus on. And I think what Jonathan, both and I agreed on is that we need to be cognizant to what we need to choose to focus on, to create that cognitive map. And for those who are also involved, such as our husbands, our wives, our significant others, especially on the home front, well, it's to communicate that expectation and to understand that sometimes we will have to support our wives or our husbands if they also have professional careers to take care of the kids or the chores or the demands of our home life. So in a sense, work-life balance is an ongoing process that requires communication, understanding, and compromise. Lastly, we touched on the role of self-awareness and self-compassion in managing stress and avoiding burnout. Jonathan highlights the value of seeking therapy to understand the root causes of negative emotions, and we discuss the importance of learning from experiences through self-reflection. So now let's slip back into stream for part 2, where Jonathan and I talk about managing others, about creating psychological safety and accountability. I'd like to just kind of rewind back a conversation. You were talking about, some of the Gen Xers, which I am, and which I presume you are too.
Yeah.
Now they are the leaders. They're sitting in the C-suite, or they're top managers and such. And they posed a question to you, as you framed it, is that, okay, well, am I a therapist to the Gen Zs? How do I deal with the millennials? They're right there. There are 3 different kind of mindsets, very general and such. I mean, if we shifted to leading people now from leading self, psychological safety is a term that is often bandied around. Perhaps I'd like to shift the conversation towards that, if that's okay with you. How do you operationally define psychological safety?
I think it's the ability to say what is on your mind without fear of reprisal or retribution, and with the knowing that you're allowed to be wrong, and that's okay. And I think when an organization, when a team is psychologically safe, people will speak up and speak their mind. They don't need to be right, and that there won't be just negative repercussions for having done so.
And I think that's a very well defined and straightforward definition of psychological safety. Now, just to add complexity to that, right now, because of wokeness or cancel culture, or however we want to define it, a lot of managers that I come across, especially these are more sort of international managers that I'm working with, they find it sometimes like there's a sensitivity, there's almost a brittleness or a fragility. They try to create a sense of psychological safety, but anything you say, some people will take super offense to that. And managers, male or female, regardless of race, they don't want to be seen as some sort of some sort of chauvinist, or some sort of racist, or some sort of whatever ist. I mean, in the complexity of that dynamic, what is your experience try to establish psychological safety when you have 3 different generations and you have this unfortunate wokeness, if I may call it that, that's kind of seeping into a lot of organizations as well as universities?
Yeah, I mean, I just try to help people go to their values and lead with kindness, and ask people to show up and be themselves. Like, you don't have to know everything, but you need to be aware of how you're being in a conversation. And so I think that there is a sense of fear, and there's certainly hostility out there, which has not been helped, and it probably has been obviously promoted by social media, and the politics of our world happen in a local way, in a minute way, in our teams and in our meetings, and that just sort of is what it is. And like, are you equipped to be able to handle yourself in those situations? And I think that there's a level of learning that we need to do, which I think happens at all ages and stages. I don't think that young people, show up somehow better equipped to deal with the complexities of the modern workplace because they have access to the language and the thinking of intersectionality, let's say, or other things that maybe they got at university that maybe people our age didn't have. They have other struggles coming into the workplace. Like, they don't actually know how to do it yet. They don't know how to do the stuff. They've only been in the workplace a couple of years. They're still learning how to be successful at work. how to do good work themselves, how to be around other people in a work environment, how to get work done, how to take feedback. These are hard things. And so while they might be able to weave in and out of the sorts of things that you were just talking about with a lot more grace and agility than maybe somebody that's older, there's a whole bunch of stuff that they don't at all know how to do. And there's a lot of fear there. They don't want people to figure out that they don't know how to do it. And they are often hiding things, like common things that young workers do at work is they'll like they've come through school and they've done great, and they've had a lot of structured, scaffolded support all the way into the workforce, and now it's laid bare for them. They can't fake it anymore. No one is gonna swoop in and support them if they can't do the thing. They have to build skills to be able to say, I don't know how to do this, or can you support me in this, or I need some extra training, whatever the case may be. They're there now. They're just there, and they're learning how to do it. And similarly, we've got workers at the other end of the journey who are probably Gen X now, who weren't at university when the level of this kind of thinking that we're talking about was just in the water and in the air. And so we've been gathering it up through lived experience, through our, conditioning and what am I trying to say? Like just absorbing it through culture. And it can be confusing, upsetting, disconcerting, and folks are worried about saying the wrong thing or insulting people or the words that they use or an idiom that's no longer appropriate. And all of this stuff is just, sitting there quite fearful for them. And, I try to walk people back. Don't go on the attack. Like you don't need to become an expert at it. No one is expecting that of you, but you do need to have a curious mindset. And you do need to go into these situations with an openness and willingness not to be perfect, but to learn. Because there's some stuff that you've got that those young folks don't have, which is experience. You know how the world works, and you know how the world of work works. And so they need your help and you need their help. And together, great teams can get made, and psychologically safe places that are deep in accountability can also get created, but not if there's big tension between either generations or values or other things. I just, I'm always looking for ways to bridge these gaps and to have folks, align around a kind of core purpose and celebrate strengths for what they are.
No, I think it's such an astute point what you're saying, right? When you're saying, for example, younger people coming in, they want to prove themselves, they want to score some early wins, but they are afraid. They're hiding sometimes behind a veil of fear because they don't want to seem incompetent. They don't want to seem like someone's made the wrong choice to hire them, right? But that would also speak to a level of vulnerability that needs to be sort of fostered within teams as part of psychological safety, because vulnerability is exactly what you're saying, is to ask for help. It's like, how do I do this? Or, I need some help. I need some resources here. Just teach me and then I can run with it, right? I mean, what do you think about vulnerability, or define the courage in vulnerability?
It's really powerful, but it's not something that you can just announce to people. Everybody should be vulnerable here, right?
Well said.
I have a former client, just a recent former client, who sort of confessed to me, like, I think everybody's scared of me. And like, what the hell? Like, I'm not, like, I don't think I'm scary. Am I scary? I'm like, well, you're not scary to me, but I'm your age. Like, I don't find you scary, but like, you're really, really experienced. You're an A-type. You drive hard. You want to get stuff done. It needs to not just be fast and good. It needs to be fast and perfect. You're probably pretty scary. And this was hard for him to hear because, he's grown a company that was small and really like everybody knew everybody, and it was beers and pizza on Friday nights. And now it's like 50 people and multiple sites, and not everybody knows him. And he comes in and he's still treating it like it used to be. And I think that's really common, is that the world moves on and you move on with it, but you're still back there in your head. You're still like it was 15 years ago, but that's really not true. Meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of new workers coming up, and the workplace is different and evolved, and they're coming with different and evolved levels of skill and ability. And I think it's just something that we just need to pay a lot of attention to. And I suppose I spend, with that particular person and many others, I spend a lot of time retooling their approach to conversations and teaching them how to just ask questions and turn the top-down managerial task-driven conversation that they are used to having into one, look, you have to go slow to go fast. And so go slow at the beginning, get curious, ask lots of questions. Hey, so we have a project coming up. What do you think? Oh, I don't know. What do you mean? I'm like, well, here are the parameters. Like, we got to get this done by this time. What do you think we'll need? Well, I guess we need this. And what else? And so it takes a while for me to teach people that have just done, like what would it normally sound like? Okay, you guys, we've got 2 weeks to get this done. I need you to do this, you to do this, and you to do this. Don't spend too much money. Go. And if you build a workplace culture that sounds like that, people don't have a deep engagement. They don't feel ownership over the work. They aren't going to feel like they have a lot of creativity. And that's not what really most leaders want, but they think it's expedient. Whereas, if you move from a place of curiosity and question asking and allow people to have a lot of access to the success and the design of their work, then they're deep into it and they'll feel a huge sense of accomplishment. And ultimately, they'll take a lot more accountability and they'll be able to design things for themselves in the future in ways that might even surprise and delight you. And, at its highest level, when a company has teams that are self-organizing and self-correcting, that's really when work happens at its most agile and, in its most sort of mature state. But it takes a lot of work to build people up and get them to have that level of like accountability and psychological safety in order for teams to act and perform in those ways.
Yeah, I think that's a very salient point, because this is not just a light switch on and off. This is a dimmer switch, and sometimes the dimmer switch is a little stiff, and you have to slowly crank it up, right? And so it is about listening. It is about questioning. It's about exploring, having an inquisitive or a curious mindset behind why a person does something. Because what I hear is that, the leader, he or she can define what needs to be done and why. So that they understand the reasoning behind the what. But it sounds like to create accountability or adaptability or agility, leave the how to them. Build the sort of the sandbox and the edges, but how the sandcastle looks, I'll leave that to you. I want you to use your education, experience, and knowledge. Is that what I understand that leads to this sort of accountability within psychological safety?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I kind of use like frameworks from nonviolent communication, stuff like that. Like I think about not doing work to them or for them, but doing work with them.
Can you explain that nonviolent communication?
Yeah. So there's like some principles in nonviolent communication where we don't want to do things to people or for them, but we want to do it with them. And I think as a way of as I sort of transpose that across to leadership and management, in my mind, what that means, would be something like if I did work to you, that would be me showing up and saying, hey, Jason, we've got a project and, it's got to get done by next Thursday, and you can only spend 30 grand on it. And I want you to build out all these things. And the next 2 steps are this and this and this. Got it? And you're going to look at me and you're going to go, because you don't want to be stupid, right? And so you'll say, and I'll go, cool, done, delegated, on to the next thing. And then next Tuesday rolls around and either you haven't finished it or you haven't finished it as good as I could have in my head. So I go, nah, and I swoop in and I save the day because I'm a hero. And I take it from you and I make you feel like crap. And then I finish it. And if I keep doing that often enough, I teach you that around here, you only need to get stuff done 3/4 because Jonathan's going to swoop in and save the day. And he actually really likes to do that. And that becomes a pattern of behavior that I see a lot. And it is frustrating on both sides. It's frustrating for me as the person that's the manager, and I think, or the leader, and I think that I've delegated something really well and been really clear. But actually, a lot of it is secret and it's in my head and in my experience.
Yeah.
And you get frustrated because you can never do better than meet my expectations. And like, who gets a gold star for meeting somebody's expectations? Like, that's just the bare minimum. And you can't even do that. So that becomes like devaluing for you. And I think that, I've got an employee that doesn't know how to do it. Well, none of that is true, but that's the dynamic that's been set up. So a better way of doing this is to build agreements with people and do work with people. So I sit with you and I'm like, hey, so we've been given this project to do. And how do you think it should run? And over time, I'm going to teach you how to go, well, I'm kind of thinking this and this and this, Jonathan. And I'll be like, cool. Like, and what else? You'd be like, what do you mean? You're like, well, like, remember the last time we did this? What did we learn? Oh, yeah, that if we don't do the step A before step B, like, it won't work. Right. So here, you should write this down, Jason, because we're doing this job and you're going to be the one that's going to be leading it, right? Great. When do we need to get it done by? Who else do we need? What resources do we need? Cool. Great. What do you need from me now to be successful? How often should we check in? Oh, once a month. Okay, great. And how should that look? What should be an agenda? And so we can build out what that relationship and that project and or that work can look like in whatever context it may be. And, the chances of you having deep ownership as the leader of this project, and if over time when we do this work together, I celebrate you in whatever way is meaningful for you, if it's just, maybe you're an introverted person and an email that just says, I really want to congratulate you on a job well done. That was excellent. You really worked hard and it was just beautiful work. For maybe some extroverted people, we would maybe find it at the team meeting. Hey, I just want to call out Jason on just killing it on this project, and that would be what would light you up. And so for me as a leader, I need to know my people well enough to know even what celebration can look like. Because you can do a great job and just make, you can celebrate somebody publicly and reduce them to a quivering wreck if that's not what works for them,
Enjoying that fetal position.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh my God, all eyes on me. And that's the last thing that makes me feel good when, that was my intention. So I think these are all just important, things to just build, that go along with doing work with people and building good agreements with them.
And I just want to underscore the importance of what you're saying. I mean, this is not rocket science. It is a hard skills, but these are the fundamentals of building relationships. We don't even have to call it leadership because there's a lot of connotation. What does that mean? No, just look at the relationships in your life, professionally, friends, colleagues that are working well. What is it that you're doing well there that you have such a good credibility? You have such a good track record both ways that you're doing that. Yeah. Well, I do this. Well, it's almost sometimes a copy and paste. Of course, you have to create a more bespoke depending upon the individual personality and the person. Yes, of course. But these ideas of questioning, the idea of cognitive empathy versus emotional empathy, the idea of listening and being curious and inquisitive and actually listening and not being always so reactive, but taking the patience and because all of these are fundamentals. We all know how to do it per se, because most of us have functional relationships in our life, and sometimes that is a template we can use. Of course, we need to refine it in the workplace, but I completely concur with what you are saying, Jonathan. It is, you get the fundamentals in place, and then this resilience or this robustness, this adaptability, the evolution, the agility in the organization, it grows. Because as you're saying, that leader that jumps in at 75% and just takes over because it's not meeting his or her expectations, you could do that for a while. But when the pressure's really on and things are coming down the conveyor belt so fast, well, that's burnout, right? And so all these things you talked at the top of the conversation about self-leadership are so critical, right? Walking them through, not role play, but you used another term, but it naturally kind of flows that way. Now, I just wanted to kind of wrap
Yeah,
that
that's
all
lovely.
together.
I love the way that you link that back. I mean, there is a sense of a sense of like self here that we need to be aware of the kind of leader that we're being. And yeah, there's some personal work that you can do, but that can look like what we just talked about. To me, it loops back really, really nicely as well. I agree.
Well, Jonathan, thank you very much. We're coming to the top of the hour, and I really appreciate the generosity of your time and sharing your knowledge. I was wondering, is there any last tips or advice or suggestions you could leave with our listeners today?
I think folks that develop their listening skills, it's a great place to begin. And some really basic things that I always work with my clients on is just mirroring back to people. So that can be as simple as, okay, Jason, let me just make sure that I'm tracking, which is a little phrase that is not a normal phrase that people use, but when you start using it, it makes you repeat back the thing. So let me just see that I'm tracking. I think I just heard you say this, and then you said this, and then you said this. So I'm not like summarizing it. I'm not like doing anything with it. I'm not analyzing it. I'm literally just saying back to you what I think it is that you've just heard, what you just said, and that I've heard. That, like, as one little tip and a tool, is so powerful. And people so rarely feel like they've been heard because everyone around us is just waiting to speak.
Outstanding. Jonathan, if the listeners are interested in reaching out to you to learn more about what you do, where can they go to find you?
Yeah, so online, I'm at clearlythen.com. I'm also really active on LinkedIn, so you can please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm a real person. If you DM me, I will DM you back. Like to spend an hour or so with any potential clients at no charge just to get to know one another and figure out whether we might be a fit. So if some of the things that I've talked about are resonating with you and you want to book some time with me, please go ahead.
Jonathan, thank you very much. I'll be sure to leave all those linked and contact information in the show notes. I just want to thank you for your time today. It was a stimulating and engaging conversation.
Oh, that's really great, Jason. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, folks, that was the insightful and super experienced Jonathan Bennett. As we talked about in the second part of the conversation, is that psychological safety and accountability go hand in hand. But how we establish psychological safety may be a very bespoke approach, but it's the ability to create a learning organization where we can feel challenged, where we can feel we add value and that our contributions matter, that we don't have to always worry about some sort of blowback about something we say or something we challenge. So I think that's established. But I think what Jonathan brings to the picture is a real deep wisdom. It's about that generational intelligence. So regardless if we're Gen Z or we are millennials or we are Gen Xers or whatever generation, it's to understand, it's out the curiosity and the openness to understand that each generation brings different advantages to the table. There are also drawbacks to each of these generations, but it's through having open dialogue, open communication, in how we collaborate and communicate that we can share from each other's experiences and we can create some sort of level of team norms. And with that said, that also allows us to create a sense of accountability because people will feel more accountable when they feel they are respected, that their values and their contributions matter. So you can rewind this episode to your heart's content to pick apart and find those nuggets of wisdom that Jonathan shared with us today. Jonathan, a personal thank you from me to you. Thank you very much for the privilege and the pleasure of having a brilliant conversation with you. I really appreciate it. Well, folks, that brings us to the tail end of another episode. I will see you Friday for Bite Size Fridays, which are about 15 to 20 minute long episodes, and they are packed with sort of very action-based tools to talk about leadership, coaching, well-being, resilience. And until then, until Friday, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.